My name is Lieutenant Colonel Arya Jackson, and I'm 38 years old. In a Washington, D.C. courtroom, my husband, a lawyer, called me a monster. He used my life-saving missions, the darkest secrets I had only ever trusted him with, to paint me as a war junkie, unfit to raise our 8-year-old daughter. His goal was simple: to take my child and destroy my honor. But he made a fatal mistake. He threw a mountain of financial records at me, convinced I was just some dumb soldier who couldn't understand numbers. He was wrong. I found proof he had embezzled over $200,000 from his own daughter's trust fund. Now, I don't just have a reason to fight. I have the weapon to destroy him. I spent my life learning how to save people, but to protect my daughter, I'll learn how to bury a traitor. He started this war, but I will be the one to end it. Follow along and watch me permanently erase a traitor from my daughter's life. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only steady thing in the room. Everything else was controlled chaos. Blood, saline, and the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air. Under the blinding glare of the surgical lights, my hands moved with a precision honed over a decade of service. Suture, clamp, suction. Repeat. My patient, a young Marine sergeant flown in from a forward operating base, had a belly full of shrapnel. His life was hanging by a thread, and I was the one holding the needle. "Vitals are dropping, Colonel." Major Ben Carter, my second-in-command and the calmest anesthesiologist I knew, spoke into my ear. His voice was a low hum, a counterpoint to the high-pitched symphony of the machines. "I see it, Ben. I need another unit of Oneg and push dopamine. He's going into shock." My eyes never left the intricate, bloody landscape of the young man's abdomen. In here, I wasn't a wife or a mother. I was Lieutenant Colonel Arya Jackson, Chief of Trauma Surgery at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. This was my sanctuary, my battlefield. Here I made sense. "Almost there," I murmured, more to myself than to the team. "Just one more bleeder." My fingers, encased in latex, located the torn vessel. A delicate dance of forceps and sutures followed. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. "Got it, close him up." A collective, unspoken sigh of relief filled the operating room. The tension broke. The sergeant's vitals began to climb back from the brink. He would live. He would see his family again. A quiet satisfaction settled in my chest, the familiar warmth that came after pulling someone back from the edge. I stripped off my bloody gloves and gown, my scrubs underneath soaked with sweat. "Good work, everyone," I said, my voice hoarse. "Ben, keep me updated on his post-op." "Always do, Arya," he replied with a tired smile. "You going to try and grab some sleep? You've been on for 36 hours. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the deep exhaustion in my bones. "I'm heading home. Lily has a piano recital tomorrow. I promised I'd be there." "A promise is a promise," he said, nodding. "Go, we've got it covered." The drive from Bethesda to our Georgetown brownstone was a blur. The adrenaline of the surgery was wearing off, leaving a hollow ache behind. I loved my job with a fierce passion, but the cost was paid in sleepless nights and moments stolen from my family. My husband, David, a high-powered corporate lawyer, never fully understood it. He saw my uniform as a rival, my pager as an intruder in our life. He respected the title, the prestige, but resented the sacrifice. I walked through the heavy oak door of our home, expecting the familiar quiet. Instead, I saw a large manila envelope on the polished mahogany of the entryway table. My name was typed on the front. David's law firm was printed in the corner. A cold knot formed in my stomach. David was in the living room, staring out the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was perfectly dressed, as always, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He didn't turn when I entered. "What's this, David?" I asked, my voice flat. I already knew. I think a part of me had known for months. "The inevitable, Arya," he said, finally facing me. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of civility. "I've filed for divorce." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen from the room. Divorce. It sounded clinical, foreign, just like that. No conversation, just papers. "Conversation?" He let out a short, bitter laugh. "We haven't had a real conversation in years. You're either at the hospital or on a plane to some godforsaken disaster zone, or you're here but so exhausted you can't see straight. I'm done competing with the entire U.S. Army for my wife's attention." "It's not a competition, David, it's my duty," I said, my voice rising. "It's who I am. You knew that when you married me." "I knew you were a doctor in the military," he corrected, taking a sip of his drink. "I didn't know I was marrying a ghost, a hero to everyone but her own family." The accusation stung, sharp and deep. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Look at the envelope, Arya, it's all in there." He gestured toward the table. I'm petitioning for sole custody of Lily. The world tilted on its axis. The floor felt like it was falling away beneath me. Sole custody? You can't be serious. You wouldn't. You can't take my daughter away from me. I can and I will, he said, his voice turning to ice. And I'll win. How can a judge possibly think that a mother who voluntarily deploys to war zones and spends half her life covered in other people's blood is a more stable parent than a father who is home every single night? My mind reeled. He was going to use my service against me. The very thing I took so much pride in, the core of my identity, he was going to twist it into a weapon. She's my daughter, David, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, terrifying dread. She is. And she deserves a normal life. A mother who is present, not a soldier who plays doctor on the other side of the world. He finished his whiskey and set the glass down with a decisive click. My lawyer, Nora Campbell, will be in touch with whomever you choose to represent you. I'll be staying at the club until this is settled. He walked past me without another glance, collected a pre-packed suitcase from the hall closet, and left. The heavy door closed behind him, the sound echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the manila envelope feeling like a bomb in my hands. Upstairs, I heard the soft melody of a music box. Lily, my 8-year-old daughter, my world. I dropped the envelope and forced my legs to move, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I pushed open her bedroom door. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by stuffed animals, carefully bandaging a teddy bear's leg. She looked up, her face breaking into a radiant smile. Mommy, you're home. Look, Sergeant Fluffington got hurt in a big battle, but I'm fixing him. I knelt down in front of her, my heart shattering into a million pieces. I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her soft, lavender-scented hair. She hugged me back tightly, her small arms a lifeline in the storm that had just broken over my head. I love you so much, baby girl, I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. I love you too, Mommy, she said, pulling back to look at me, her brown eyes, so much like mine, wide with concern. Are you crying? No, sweetie, I lied, forcing a smile. I'm just so happy to be home with you. As I tucked her into bed that night, reading her favorite story about a brave knight, I watched her eyelids grow heavy. She fought sleep as she always did, her little hand clutching mine. Mommy, she murmured, her voice drowsy. Will you be here when I wake up? The simple question felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It was a question she asked every night I was home. But tonight, it held a terrifying new weight. David's words echoed in my head. She deserves a mother who is present. Always, Lilybug, I whispered, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I will always come back to you. I will always be here. I promise. It was a promise I had every intention of keeping. But as I sat in the darkness of her room long after she'd fallen asleep, I knew this was a different kind of war. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid I might not know how to win. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Sarah Evans. She was a former JAG officer herself, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had left the service to open her own family law practice catering to military members. We sat in her sterile, impersonal office, the divorce petition lying on the desk between us like an unexploded ordnance. He's not playing around, Arya, Sarah said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the section detailing the custody claim. He's framing this as a choice between stability and chaos, between a safe, predictable home with him and a life of uncertainty and danger with you. But it's not danger, I argued, frustration rising in my voice. My deployments are humanitarian missions. I'm a doctor. I go to field hospitals, not front lines. I save lives. I know that, you know that. But David is going to paint a very different picture for the judge. Think about it. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, decorated Army surgeon, just returned from a 3-month deployment to a refugee camp on the Syrian border where she treated victims of a chemical attack. How does that sound to a civilian judge whose biggest risk of the day is a paper cut? I deflated. He's going to use my commendations against me. He's going to use everything, Sarah confirmed, her eyes softening with a hint of pity. He's smart, and his lawyer, Nora Campbell, is a shark. They're going to portray your dedication as negligence, your courage as recklessness, your service as a fundamental failing as a parent. So what do we do? I asked, feeling helpless. How do I fight that? Sarah leaned forward, her expression turning fierce. We fight back with the truth. We show them who you are, not just the soldier but the mother. We get testimonials from teachers, other parents, neighbors. We document every piano recital you've attended, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. We prove that you are not just present, but an exemplary mother in spite of your service, not at the expense of it. Her words were a balm, a call to arms. The fear began to recede, replaced by the familiar steel of determination. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier and a mother, and I would fight for my daughter with everything I had. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "Let's prepare for battle." The first skirmish came a week later in a pretrial mediation session. I sat across a polished conference table from David and Nora Campbell. The air was thick with tension. Nora, a woman with sharp features and an even sharper suit, led the charge. "My client is concerned, Colonel Jackson," she began, her tone patronizingly smooth, "that your demanding career makes it impossible for you to provide the consistent and stable environment a child needs. Your deployment schedule is unpredictable. The nature of your work is inherently traumatic. We believe it's in Lily's best interest to have one primary, stable home." "My home is stable," I countered, keeping my voice even. "And my work, while demanding, is what provides for our family." Including the Georgetown brownstone David seems so comfortable in. David flinched, but Nora didn't miss a beat. "No one is questioning your financial contributions, Colonel. We are questioning your emotional and physical availability. Tell me, how many of Lily's birthdays have you missed in the last 5 years?" It was a low blow. I had missed 2. One because I was leading a surgical team in Haiti after the earthquake, the other because of a sudden outbreak in a refugee camp in Africa. Both times I had celebrated with Lily before I left and as soon as I got back. "I was serving my country," I said through clenched teeth. "I was saving lives. And no one is more grateful for your service than we are," Nora said, her smile never reaching her cold eyes. But Lily wasn't in Haiti. Lily was in D.C., blowing out candles on a cake without her mother. That's the reality we will present to the court, a reality of absence. David sat silently beside her, letting her do his dirty work. He wouldn't meet my gaze. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, was now a stranger hiding behind a lawyer, trying to tear that life apart. He was using my greatest sacrifices as proof of my greatest failures. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. As we left the session, with nothing resolved, Sarah put a hand on my arm. "Stay strong, Arya. This is what they do. They try to get under your skin, make you emotional, make you angry." "It's working," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "Don't let it," she said firmly. "Go home, hug your daughter, and remember what you're fighting for. We're just getting started." That night, as I was helping Lily with her homework, she looked up at me with a worried frown. "Is Daddy mad at you?" I paused, my pen hovering over her math worksheet. "No, sweetie. Daddy and I were just figuring some things out. Grown-up things." "Is he coming home soon?" I chose my words carefully. "He's going to be staying somewhere else for a little while, but he loves you very, very much. And so do I. Nothing will ever change that." She seemed to accept the answer, turning back to her homework, but I saw the flicker of insecurity in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. And the thought that our fight was already casting a shadow over her childhood filled me with a fresh wave of rage and determination. David wanted a war. He was going to get one. I wouldn't just defend my role as a mother. I would prove that my service didn't diminish it. It defined it. It made me who I was, a woman who knew how to fight for what mattered most. And nothing mattered more than Lily. The days that followed were a tightrope walk over a canyon of anxiety. At the hospital, I was in command. The world made sense within the tiled walls of the OR and the quiet intensity of the ICU. But the moment I stepped outside, I was a soldier in a battle with no clear rules of engagement. Every text message, every email, felt like a potential threat. My team noticed the change, though they were too professional to comment directly. Ben would leave a fresh cup of coffee on my desk without a word. Lena Petrova, a brilliant young surgical resident I was mentoring, started anticipating my needs in the OR with almost telepathic accuracy. She was a firecracker, ambitious and deeply compassionate, a younger version of myself in many ways. "Colonel, I reviewed the charts for the incoming medevac," she said one afternoon, catching me in the hallway. "Compound fractures, probable internal bleeding. I've already prepped OR 3 and alerted the blood bank." "Good work, Petrova," I said, offering a tired smile. "You're always one step ahead." She hesitated for a moment, her usual confidence wavering. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" "You seem strained." I appreciated her concern. "Just dealing with some family matters, Lena. Nothing that will affect my work." "Of course not, ma'am," she said quickly. "It's just you're a legend around here. We all look up to you, not just for your skill, but for how you handle everything. If you ever need anything, the whole department has your back." Her words were a small comfort, a reminder that in this part of my life I was respected, I was seen. "Thank you, Lena. That means more than you know." The day of Lily's piano recital arrived, a bubble of normalcy in a sea of legal turmoil. I left the hospital early, a feat that required military-level planning. I traded my scrubs for a simple navy blue dress, feeling strangely exposed without my uniform. As I sat in the school auditorium, a cavernous room filled with the scent of floor polish and nervous parents, my pager felt like a phantom limb. I scanned the rows of seats, and my heart sank. David was there. He was sitting 3 rows behind me, looking every bit the proud, supportive father in a crisp button-down shirt. He was talking to another parent, laughing at something they said. A performance. Everything was a performance. When he saw me, his smile tightened. He excused himself and made his way to my row. "Arya," he said, his voice a low murmur as a small boy in a too-big tuxedo began to play a clumsy rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. "Surprised you could make it." "I figured there'd be a national emergency or something." "I told you I'd be here, David," I said, my voice tight. "I keep my promises." "Do you?" he asked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that." He didn't sit with me. He moved to the other side of the aisle, positioning himself so that Lily would see him the moment she walked on stage. He was marking his territory. When the announcer called Lily's name, my breath caught in my throat. She walked onto the stage, a tiny figure in a white dress, her patent leather shoes clicking nervously. She looked so small, so fragile. She sat at the enormous grand piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out into the audience. Her eyes found mine first. I gave her a small, encouraging nod and a thumbs up. Then her eyes found David, and he gave her a wide, theatrical smile. She looked back at me, a flicker of confusion on her face. Then she placed her small fingers on the keys and began to play. It was a simple piece by Mozart, one she had practiced for months. The notes were clear, confident. She poured all of her little 8-year-old heart into the music. In that moment, the courtroom, the lawyers, the betrayals, it all faded away. There was only my daughter, beautiful and brilliant, creating something lovely in a world that had suddenly become so ugly. As she played, a memory surfaced, unbidden. It was from my last deployment. I was in a makeshift hospital in Jordan, just miles from the Syrian border. We'd received a wave of casualties from a sarin gas attack. The victims were mostly children. For 48 hours straight, I had worked, my hands raw, my heart aching, trying to save small bodies that were too broken to be saved. The air was thick with the smell of death and almonds, the telltale sign of the nerve agent. I had called David on a secure satellite phone during a rare moment of quiet, my voice cracking with exhaustion and horror. I told him things I told no one else. I told him about the children, about the feeling of utter helplessness, about the nightmares I knew would follow. He had listened, murmured words of comfort, told me to be safe, to come home. He had been my confidant. He had held my trauma in his hands. And now, he was going to use it against me. When Lily finished her piece, the applause was warm and genuine. She took a small, perfect bow, her eyes shining with pride. I was on my feet, clapping until my hands stung, tears blurring my vision. She ran off the stage and straight into my arms. "You were wonderful, my love, absolutely perfect," I said, hugging her tightly. "Did you see me, Mommy? I didn't even make one mistake." "I saw every perfect note," I said, kissing the top of her head. David approached us, his smile back in place. "That was fantastic, sweetie. Daddy is so proud of you." He scooped her up into a hug. "Let's go get some ice cream to celebrate, what do you say?" He was doing it right here, in front of her, forcing me into a corner. If I said no, I was the difficult one. If I said yes, I had to endure a charade of family unity. "Mommy can come too, right?" Lily asked, looking between us. Before I could answer, David said smoothly, "Of course, we're still a family." The hypocrisy was staggering. The ice cream trip was excruciating. I sat there, listening to David talk about his big cases and Lily chatter about her friends, a smile plastered on my face. I felt like a spy in my own life. When he dropped us back at the house, he gave Lily another hug and gave me a look that was pure venom. "Don't get used to this," he whispered, his voice low enough that Lily couldn't hear. "Enjoy these moments while you can. They're numbered." The threat hung in the air long after his car disappeared down the street. 2 days later, the other shoe dropped. Sarah called me, her voice grim. "Arya, I just received a new filing from Nora Campbell. It's a motion to compel, supplemented by a request for a psychological evaluation." "A psych eval? On what grounds?" I asked, my blood running cold. "On the grounds that you have been repeatedly exposed to extreme and gruesome trauma in the course of your duties, and that your untreated PTSD poses a direct threat to Lily's well-being." I sank into my office chair, the words stealing my breath. "Untreated PTSD?" I don't have PTSD. I have regular post-deployment screenings. I've been cleared for duty every single time. I know, but they're not just making a general claim, Arya. They've named specific missions. They want your entire file, including all medical and psychological debriefings related to Operation Nightingale. Operation Nightingale. That was the code name for the humanitarian mission in Jordan, the chemical attack, the things I had only ever told David. He told them, I whispered, the betrayal a fresh, gaping wound. He gave them the name of a classified mission. It appears so, Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. This is a new low, even for Nora. Using classified information in a civilian custody hearing is not just unethical, it's illegal. But it's also brilliant. They know you can't and won't discuss the details of the mission in open court, so if you refuse to comply, you look like you're hiding something. If you comply, they get to comb through the most traumatic experiences of your career looking for anything they can twist into a symptom of mental instability. So he's got me, I said, the room feeling small, the walls closing in. No, Sarah said, her voice hardening. He's made a mistake, he's underestimated you, and he's underestimated me. We're filing an emergency motion to seal and a request for sanctions against Ms. Campbell for introducing classified material. But Arya, you need to be prepared. This is going to get much, much uglier. That afternoon, I walked the long, sterile corridors of Walter Reed, my mind a storm of legal strategies and raw pain. I felt isolated, trapped. My career was being used to prove I was an unfit mother, and the man I once loved was feeding my enemies the ammunition. As I rounded a corner near the prosthetics lab, I nearly collided with a tall, imposing figure in a Class A uniform. His shoulders were adorned with 4 silver stars. I snapped to attention. General Thorne, I said, my voice coming out more flustered than I intended. General Marcus Thorne was a legend, the current Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. He looked at me, his sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the name tag on my uniform. Colonel Jackson, he said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded respect. He paused, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Arya Jackson, you don't remember me, do you? I apologize, sir, I said, trying to place him. I've had the honor of meeting many senior officers. We didn't meet, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. I was unconscious. Kandahar, 2018. My convoy hit an IED. You were the lead surgeon who pulled 3 pounds of metal out of my chest and put me back together again. The memory clicked into place. The VIP patient, the frantic surgery, the weeks of recovery. Of course, General, I remember the case. I'm glad to see you looking so well, sir. I'm looking at all thanks to you, Colonel, he said, his gaze direct and sincere. I read your file after I recovered, one of the most decorated surgeons in the medical corps. So tell me what brings that grim look to your face. I hope the Army isn't running you too ragged. I hesitated. You don't unload your personal problems on a 4-star general. Just a challenging day, sir, nothing I can't handle. He studied my face for a long moment, and I had the distinct feeling he could see right through my carefully constructed military bearing. The Army doesn't forget its own, Colonel, he said, his voice softening slightly. And I, for one, have a very long memory. If you ever find yourself in a fight where you need air support, you know where to find my office. He gave a slight nod, then continued down the hallway, his footsteps echoing with quiet authority. I stood there, watching him go, a strange and unexpected sense of hope blooming in my chest. It was a long shot. It was probably nothing. But in a war that was quickly becoming a battle of attrition, the hint of a powerful ally felt like a miracle. The legal battle escalated. Sarah's motion to seal the classified information was granted, a small victory, but Nora Campbell was undeterred. She pivoted, filing endless discovery requests, demanding depositions from my commanding officers, my colleagues, even Lena Petrova. She was on a fishing expedition, hoping to find anyone who would testify that my job made me emotionally volatile, absent, or distracted. It was a war of 1,000 cuts, designed to exhaust my resources and my spirit. David, meanwhile, was playing the part of the concerned father to perfection. He was at every school event, volunteering for the PTA, sending emails to Lily's teachers signed her loving and always present father. He was building a narrative brick by painstaking brick, and I was the villain of the story. The strain began to show. I was losing weight. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind was constantly shifting between surgical protocols and legal precedents. Ben cornered me one evening in the doctor's lounge after a particularly grueling 12-hour surgery. Arya, talk to me, he said, handing me a bottle of water. This isn't just family matters anymore. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. I finally broke. The dam of professional composure I had so carefully constructed crumbled. I told him everything. The divorce, the sole custody demand, the psych eval, David's betrayal with Operation Nightingale. He listened patiently, his calm demeanor a steady anchor. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That man," he said, his voice dangerously low, "is a piece of work. Using your service like that, it's despicable." "He knows my triggers, Ben," I said, my voice hoarse. "He knows what my work costs me, and he's turning that cost into a weapon." "Then we disarm him," Ben said, his focus sharpening. "Nora Campbell wants to depose me next week. Let her. I'll tell her about the surgeon who stays for hours after her shift to hold a patient's hand, the commander who knows the name of every nurse's kid, the doctor who fought for funding for a new PTSD therapy wing. I'll tell them who you really are." Lena Petrova was deposed the following day. She called me afterwards, her voice shaking with anger. "Ma'am, that woman was a snake. She tried to twist everything. She asked if you ever seemed stressed, if your hands ever shook after a long surgery. She asked if you talked about your missions. What did you say, Lena?" "I told her the truth," she said fiercely. "I told her your hands are the steadiest I've ever seen. I told her the only time you seem stressed is when you're fighting for a patient's life. And I told her that you don't bring the war home, you leave it in the OR where it belongs. I hope it helped, ma'am." "It helped," I said, my throat tight with gratitude. "Thank you, Lena, you're a good soldier." "I learned from the best, Colonel." Their loyalty was a shield, but the battle was taking its toll on the most important front, Lily. She was growing quieter, more withdrawn. Her teacher called me for a meeting. "Arya, I'm a little concerned about Lily," Ms. Albright said, her kind face etched with worry. We were sitting in her cheerful, primary-colored classroom after school. "She's been distracted. Her grades are slipping a little. And yesterday, during art class, she drew a picture of your family. You were on one side of the page in your uniform, and her father was on the other. Lily was in the middle with a big crack running down the page between you." I stared at the drawing, a simple, childish crayon sketch that depicted the gaping chasm in our lives with devastating clarity. My heart ached. This was what David was doing. In his quest to protect her, he was tearing her world in two. "We're going through a separation," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm trying to shield her from it, but—" "Children are like emotional Geiger counters," Ms. Albright said gently. "They pick up on everything. Whatever is happening, she needs to know she isn't the cause, and she needs to feel secure. She needs to know she's not going to lose one of her parents." That night, I sat with Lily on her bed. "Lilybug," I began, my heart pounding. "You know Mommy and Daddy love you more than anything in the whole world, right?" She nodded, clutching Sergeant Fluffington. "Sometimes, grown-ups decide that they can be better parents if they don't live in the same house anymore. It's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just a change, but we will both always be your parents. We will both always be here for you." "But Daddy said you might have to go away for a long, long time," she said, her lower lip trembling. "He said your job is very dangerous and maybe it would be safer if I just stayed with him." Rage, white-hot and pure, surged through me. He was poisoning her. He was using our daughter's fear as a tool in his legal strategy. I pulled her close, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "Listen to me, Lily. My job is to help people. Yes, I go to faraway places sometimes, but my most important job in the entire world is being your mommy. Nothing and no one will ever take me away from you. Do you understand?" She nodded, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her until she fell asleep, my mind racing. This had to end. I couldn't let him do this to her. The next day, I walked into Sarah's office. "I want to settle," I said without preamble. Sarah looked up from a stack of files, her eyebrows shooting up. "Settle? Arya, we're holding our own. Nora hasn't laid a glove on you. Ben and Lena were fantastic witnesses." "It's not about me anymore," I said, sinking into a chair. "It's about Lily. He's telling her I might be taken away from her. He's scaring her, Sarah. I can't let this go to a trial. I can't put her on a witness stand or have a court-appointed psychologist interview her. I'll give him whatever he wants. Joint custody, child support, just make it stop." Sarah looked at me, her expression a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "Arya, he won't stop at joint custody. His goal is sole custody. If you show weakness now, he'll take everything. We have to fight." "How? How do we fight a man who is willing to use his own child's fear against her mother?" "We find his weakness," she said, her eyes glinting. "Everyone has one, we just haven't found David's yet." The answer came from an unexpected place. A few days later, a thick financial disclosure packet arrived from Nora's office. It was standard procedure. I sat at my dining room table late one night, poring over pages of bank statements, investment portfolios, and tax returns. It was a sea of numbers, and my exhausted brain was struggling to make sense of it all. I was looking at the statements for a trust fund that had been set up for Lily by her maternal grandparents. It was a substantial amount, meant for her college education and future. David was the trustee. As I traced the numbers, something felt wrong. There were regular withdrawals, large ones, labeled investment management fees, and portfolio rebalancing. But they were going to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. My heart started to beat a little faster. I pulled up the statements from the previous year. The withdrawals had started about 18 months ago, small at first, then growing larger and more frequent. I cross-referenced the dates. The withdrawals often coincided with David's trips to Las Vegas for client meetings, or the purchase of a new sports car he'd claimed was a company bonus. I started digging deeper, pulling up our old joint tax returns and credit card statements. A picture began to form, one of reckless spending, of a lifestyle that our combined incomes, while significant, couldn't possibly support. He wasn't just living beyond his means, he was funding his life with our daughter's future. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaking when I called her first thing in the morning. "I think I found it. I think I found his weakness." I explained what I had discovered: the trust fund, the withdrawals, the consulting firm. "Son of a bitch," Sarah breathed into the phone. "He's embezzling from his own daughter. Arya, this is it. This is the silver bullet. This isn't just bad parenting, it's a felony. Does he know you have these?" "They sent them over as part of discovery," I said, a grim sense of satisfaction beginning to replace the shock. "He's so arrogant he probably didn't even think I'd look that closely, or that I'd understand what I was seeing." "His arrogance is going to be his downfall," Sarah said, a thrill of the hunt in her voice. "I'm going to hire a forensic accountant first thing this morning. We need irrefutable proof. If we can prove he's been stealing from Lily's trust, his entire case falls apart. No judge in the world would grant custody to a man who robs his own child." A wave of nausea washed over me. This was the man I had been married to for 10 years, the father of my child. He was not just a liar, he was a thief. His grand moral crusade to protect Lily was a smokescreen. He wanted me out of the picture not because I was an unfit mother, but because he wanted sole control of her finances. He wanted to continue plundering her trust fund without any oversight. The betrayal was on a whole new level. It wasn't just about my service or our broken marriage. It was about his fundamental character. He had been willing to destroy me, to traumatize our daughter, all to cover up his own greed and deception. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now," Sarah said, her voice like steel, "we stop defending. We start attacking." The shift in strategy was immediate. Sarah filed a new motion, this one an emergency petition to have David removed as trustee of Lily's fund and for a full, court-ordered audit of his finances. We were no longer reacting to his attacks, we were launching our own. The day we were scheduled to appear in court for the motion was tense. David and Nora were clearly blindsided. Nora's usual smug confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic, whispered conversation with David just before the judge entered. David looked pale, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. He shot me a look of pure hatred from across the courtroom. It was the look of a cornered animal. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice ringing with confidence. "We have reason to believe the petitioner, Mr. Jackson, has been systematically misappropriating funds from the trust established for his daughter, Lily Jackson. We have evidence of numerous questionable withdrawals totaling over $200,000 over the past 18 months. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Alina Vance, looked over her glasses at David. "Mr. Jackson, these are very serious allegations. Do you have a response?" Nora Campbell jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, this is a desperate and baseless tactic by the respondent to deflect from her own parental failings. These were legitimate fees for financial services rendered to grow the trust. Then you won't object to a full forensic audit, will you, Ms. Campbell?" Sarah countered smoothly. "If everything is above board, an audit will only serve to clear your client's name." Nora was trapped. To object would be an admission of guilt. The judge looked from Sarah to Nora, her expression grim. "I am granting the motion for a full forensic audit," Judge Vance declared, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And until that audit is complete, I am freezing the assets of the trust and temporarily suspending Mr. Jackson's trusteeship. We will revisit this matter and the larger issue of custody once I have the auditor's report." It was a massive victory. We had him. He was exposed. As the judge banged her gavel, I allowed myself a small, fleeting moment of triumph. But then I looked at David. His face was a mask of cold fury. This wasn't over. I had wounded him, but a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. He had lost the legal high ground, but I knew with a chilling certainty that he would find another way to make me pay. The war was far from over. He had just changed battlefields. The court-ordered audit was a slow-moving beast, a meticulous excavation of David's financial life. While the accountants did their work, the custody case was in a strange limbo. We were in a ceasefire, but the tension was thicker than ever. David was forced to move out of his suite at the club and into a smaller, less prestigious apartment. The financial freeze meant his lavish lifestyle came to a screeching halt. He was furious, and he channeled that fury into a campaign of psychological warfare. He would call Lily every night, his voice dripping with sadness, telling her how much he missed her, how empty his new apartment was, how he wished their family could be whole again. He was positioning himself as the victim, the loving father being kept from his child by a cruel, unfeeling mother. Lily, caught in the middle, grew more confused and anxious. "Daddy says he's sad because you won't let him come home," she told me one evening, her eyes welling up with tears. "Did you make him leave, Mommy?" "It's complicated, sweetie," I said, my heart twisting. "We both need some space right now. It doesn't mean we love you any less." How could I explain embezzlement to an 8-year-old? How could I tell her that her father was not the man she thought he was, without shattering her world? The pressure was immense. I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly trying to reassure Lily while fighting a silent, vicious battle with her father. My work, once again, became my refuge. In the OR, the objectives were clear. Save the patient, stop the bleeding, fix what is broken. The stakes were life and death, but it was a clean fight, a fight with rules. One afternoon, I was scrubbing in for a complex vascular repair on a soldier injured in a training accident. Ben was by my side, his presence a quiet comfort. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low. "I feel like I'm in a constant state of bracing for impact," I admitted, lathering my hands with soap. "Audit is taking forever, and in the meantime, he's poisoning Lily against me, one phone call at a time. He's a cornered rat, Arya. He's lashing out because he's losing. It doesn't feel like I'm winning, Ben. It feels like my daughter is the one paying the price for this war." "Kids are resilient," he said, rinsing his hands. "She'll get through this. And she has you. You're the strongest person I know." His faith in me was a lifeline, but my own faith was wavering. David had been my husband for a decade. If I had been so wrong about him, what other blind spots did I have? The doubt was a cancer, eating away at my confidence. The day of the main custody hearing finally arrived. It was a cold, gray morning in D.C., the sky the color of slate. The forensic audit report had come in the day before. It was damning. The accountant had traced over $250,000 from Lily's trust directly to David's personal accounts to pay for luxury vacations, car leases, and gambling debts. It was irrefutable. I walked into the courthouse with Sarah, my stomach in knots. I wore my Class A uniform. It was a calculated choice. I wasn't just a mother fighting for her child, I was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. My uniform was a symbol of my character, my discipline, my service. It was my armor. David and Nora were already there. David looked haggard, the slick veneer of his success stripped away. He refused to look at me. Nora, however, looked as polished and predatory as ever. Something in her calm demeanor set my teeth on edge. She had a plan. She wasn't defeated yet. The courtroom was cold and formal. Judge Vance presided, her face an impassive mask. Sarah presented the findings of the audit first, her voice clear and methodical as she laid out the story of David's deception, supported by a mountain of evidence. It was a brutal, systematic takedown. With every exhibit she presented, I could feel the ground shifting in our favor. When it was Nora's turn, I expected her to try and mitigate the damage, to plead for leniency, to argue that David had made a terrible mistake. She did none of those things. "Your Honor," she began, her voice resonating with theatrical gravity. "My client does not contest the findings of the audit. He made a grave error in judgment, one for which he is deeply remorseful and for which he will make full restitution." I exchanged a surprised look with Sarah. What was she doing? "However," Nora continued, her voice rising, "the financial issue, while serious, is a separate matter from custody. The central question before this court remains, who is the more suitable parent to provide a stable, safe, and nurturing environment for Lily Jackson? And on that question, we have new and disturbing evidence regarding the respondent, Colonel Jackson." She turned and looked directly at me, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Your Honor, I would like to call a surprise witness." Sarah was on her feet instantly. "Objection, we were not given notice of any new witnesses." "This witness only came forward 2 days ago, Your Honor," Nora said smoothly. "His testimony is directly relevant to Colonel Jackson's fitness as a parent." "I'll allow it," the judge said, her curiosity piqued. "But Ms. Campbell, this had better be substantive." "Oh, it is, Your Honor," Nora purred. She turned to the courtroom door. "The defense calls Mr. Ethan Hayes to the stand." My blood turned to ice. Ethan Hayes. He was a former Army medic, a specialist who had served under my command during a short, brutal deployment in Somalia 3 years ago. The mission had gone sideways. We were there to provide support for a famine relief effort, but we were caught in the crossfire of a sudden civil war uprising. Our small field hospital was overrun. We worked for 72 hours straight with limited supplies, surrounded by the sounds of gunfire and mortars. It was hell on earth. Hayes had cracked under the pressure. He had frozen during a critical moment, abandoning a patient on the operating table. I had to physically remove him from the OR. He was given a general discharge a few months later for failure to adapt to a combat environment. He had blamed me for ruining his career ever since. He walked into the courtroom, a bitter, resentful man in a cheap suit. He avoided my gaze as he was sworn in. "Mr. Hayes," Nora began, her voice dripping with sympathy, "please tell the court about your experience serving under the command of Colonel Jackson in Somalia." Ethan took a deep breath. "She was reckless," he began, his voice shaking with what sounded like genuine fear, but I knew was just venom. "She put all of us in danger. She refused to follow protocol. She had a kind of bloodlust. She seemed to thrive on the chaos, on the gore. It wasn't about saving lives for her. It was about the adrenaline. She was a monster." "Objection," Sarah shouted. "The witness is offering unsubstantiated, slanderous opinions, not facts." "Sustained," the judge said. "Mr. Hayes, stick to what you saw and heard." "I saw her ignore a direct order to evacuate," Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "She kept us there in the middle of a firefight, even when the field hospital was no longer secure. She said, and I quote, 'These people aren't going to die on my watch, even if it costs us a few of our own.' She was willing to sacrifice us, her own soldiers, for her ego." It was a grotesque distortion of the truth. The order to evacuate had come too late. Moving our critical patients at that point would have been a death sentence for them. I had made a command decision to stay, to protect the lives of the wounded civilians under my care. It was a calculated risk, and in the end, we had saved over 100 people and gotten our entire team out without a single casualty. But Ethan was twisting my command decision into a sign of reckless endangerment. "And tell me, Mr. Hayes," Nora pressed on, "did you witness any other behavior that concerned you?" "Yes," he said, finally looking at me, his eyes full of malice. "After it was all over, when we were back at the main base, I saw her in her tent. She was laughing, surrounded by all that death, all that horror, and she was laughing. It wasn't right. It wasn't human." Another lie. I had been listening to a recording Lily had sent me, a silly knock-knock joke she had told. In the midst of all that darkness, my daughter's voice, her innocent laughter, had been the one thing that kept me sane. It was a moment of private, desperate relief, and he was twisting it into the cackle of a sociopath. Nora turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is the woman who wants sole custody of an 8-year-old child. A woman who gets a thrill from war. A woman who laughs at death. A woman who is so profoundly damaged by her experiences that she can no longer distinguish between acceptable risk and reckless endangerment. We rest our case." The courtroom was silent. I sat there, stunned, my uniform feeling less like armor and more like a straitjacket. David was using my service against me again, but this time, he had found a disgruntled soldier to tell the exact story he wanted the court to hear. He wasn't just attacking my role as a mother, he was attacking my honor as an officer. He was trying to destroy every part of me. Sarah did her best on cross-examination, exposing Ethan's history of disciplinary problems and the circumstances of his discharge. But the damage was done. He had planted a seed of doubt, painting a vivid, horrifying picture of me that would be hard to erase. Judge Vance looked at me, her face unreadable. "Colonel Jackson, do you have anything to say in response to this testimony?" My throat was dry. My mind was a whirlwind of anger and despair. I looked at David. He was watching me, a faint, cruel smile on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had finally broken me. I stood up, my back ramrod straight. "Your Honor," I began, my voice quiet but clear. "Everything Mr. Hayes said is a malicious distortion of the truth, but he is right about one thing: I am a soldier, and I have seen the very worst of humanity. I have held dying children in my arms. I have pieced together bodies that were torn apart by hatred and violence. And yes, those experiences have changed me. They have left scars, but they have not damaged me. They have forged me. They have taught me the profound, immeasurable value of a single human life. And there is no life I value more, no life I will fight harder to protect than that of my daughter, Lily. My voice grew stronger, filling the silent courtroom. My husband wants you to believe that my service makes me a monster. But the truth is, my service is what makes me a mother. It has taught me about sacrifice. It has taught me about resilience. And it has taught me that the only thing worth fighting for, the only thing that truly matters in this broken world, is love. And my love for my daughter is the most powerful weapon I have. It is the reason I am here today, and it is the reason I will never, ever give up on her. I sat down, my heart pounding. I had spoken my truth. Now all I could do was wait and see if it was enough. The judge looked at me, then at David, then down at the files in front of her. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Then a side door to the courtroom opened. A bailiff entered and approached the bench, handing the judge a note. She read it, her eyebrows rising slightly. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom until it landed on the entrance. "It seems," she said, a strange tone in her voice, "that we have an unexpected visitor who wishes to address the court. A character witness for the respondent." Nora Campbell was on her feet again. "Objection, Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense has rested." "I am aware of that, Ms. Campbell," the judge said, her eyes still fixed on the door. "But given the unusual nature of the previous testimony and the stature of this particular individual, I am inclined to make an exception. I will allow it." The courtroom doors swung open. And in walked General Marcus Thorne in full dress uniform, his chest a constellation of ribbons and medals, 4 silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. He walked with an air of quiet, absolute authority, his gaze fixed on the judge's bench. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. He was here. He had got my message. He had brought the air support. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic click of General Thorne's dress shoes on the marble floor. Nora Campbell looked stunned. David's face had gone from triumphant to ashen. Even Judge Vance seemed taken aback by the sheer presence of the man who now stood before her bench. "General Thorne," the judge said, her voice filled with a deference I had not heard before. "This is an unexpected honor. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Your Honor," the general began, his voice calm and powerful, filling the room. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am not here today in my official capacity as the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. I am here as a private citizen, and as a former patient of Lieutenant Colonel Arya Jackson." He turned his head slightly, and for the first time, his eyes met mine across the courtroom. In his gaze, I saw not pity, but a profound and unwavering respect. It was a silent message. "I have your 6. Please, approach the witness stand, General," Judge Vance said, gesturing. As he was sworn in, I risked a glance at David. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His entire strategy, his entire case, was built on painting me as a reckless, unstable soldier. And now, a living, breathing 4-star legend was sitting on the witness stand, about to testify on my behalf. Sarah, recovering quickly from her own shock, stood up. "General, thank you for being here. Could you please tell the court how you know Colonel Jackson?" "As I said," General Thorne began, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom before settling on the judge, "I was her patient. 7 years ago in Kandahar, my vehicle was struck by a significant explosive device. I was, to put it mildly, grievously wounded. The medics on the ground did not expect me to survive the flight to the field hospital, but I did. And the reason I did, the reason I am alive today, is because Colonel Jackson was the surgeon waiting for me on the other side." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I was in her operating room for 9 hours. She and her team performed miracles. They removed shrapnel from my heart, reconstructed my entire left leg, and brought me back from cardiac arrest twice. I have read the after-action report. Her performance under pressure was not just exemplary, it was textbook. She was calm, decisive, and brilliant." Sarah nodded. "And after the surgery, General, what was your experience with her during your recovery?" "That, to me, is even more important," he said. "For weeks, I was in the ICU, fighting infections, enduring follow-up surgeries. Colonel Jackson was a constant presence. She wasn't just my doctor, she was my advocate. She was my lifeline. She managed my care with a level of compassion and dedication I have rarely seen in my 40 years of service. She spoke to my wife on the satellite phone every single day, explaining my condition, reassuring her. She treated me not as a general, but as a human being, as a husband and a father who needed to get home to his family. He turned his gaze directly on me again. I have seen the cost of war etched on the faces of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. I have seen the toll it takes. But what I saw in Colonel Jackson was not a monster who thrived on chaos, as was just alleged. I saw a healer, a protector, a woman of immense strength and even greater compassion. The very qualities that make her an extraordinary officer are the same qualities that, in my humble opinion, make her an extraordinary mother. Nora Campbell could see her case disintegrating before her eyes. She rose for cross-examination, her voice tight with desperation. General Thorne, with all due respect, your experience was 7 years ago. A lot can change in a person in 7 years, can it not? Especially a person who repeatedly exposes herself to the horrors of war. Indeed it can, Counselor, the general replied smoothly. And in Colonel Jackson's case, it has. She has gone on to lead humanitarian missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She has earned a Bronze Star for her service. She has become one of the most respected trauma surgeons in the entire medical corps. So yes, she has changed. She has become even more capable, more dedicated, and more invaluable to this nation. But you can't speak to her current state of mind, can you? Nora pressed. You can't know what goes on inside her home. No, I cannot, General Thorne conceded, but I can speak to her character. And character, Ms. Campbell, is not situational. It is the bedrock of a person. A person with the integrity and fortitude of Colonel Jackson does not simply abandon those qualities when she takes off her uniform. I would trust her with my life, I have, and I would trust her with the life of a child without a moment's hesitation. I believe the Army is lucky to have her, and I believe her daughter is even luckier. He finished speaking. There was nothing more to say. He had not just refuted Ethan Hayes' testimony, he had annihilated it. He had used the full weight of his rank, his reputation, and his personal experience to vouch for my character in the most powerful way imaginable. Nora Campbell sat down, defeated. I have no further questions, Your Honor, she mumbled. Judge Vance looked at the general. Thank you for your testimony, General. It has been illuminating. You are excused. As General Thorne stepped down, he walked past my table. He didn't say a word, but he placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a transfer of strength, a final act of support. The judge looked at the clock. It is late. I have heard a great deal of testimony today. I will be reviewing all the evidence, including the audit report and the witness statements. I will render my decision on the matter of custody tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. This court is adjourned. The bang of her gavel felt like a gunshot. It was over. All the fighting, all the depositions, all the pain. It had all led to this. Now all that was left was the waiting. I walked out of the courtroom in a daze. Sarah was ecstatic. Arya, that was incredible, a 4-star general, I've never seen anything like it. Nora Campbell looked like she'd been hit by a truck. I can't believe he came, I said, still trying to process it. He respects you, Sarah said simply. And he came to make sure the court did too. As we were standing in the hallway, David approached. His face was a mask of cold fury. Nora was trying to pull him away, but he shook her off. You think you've won, don't you? He hissed, his voice low and venomous. You bring in some big-shot general to vouch for you. You play the hero, but I know who you are, Arya, and this isn't over. You'll get your victory in court, but you will pay for this, I will make sure of it. Is that a threat, David? I asked, my voice steady, the fear finally gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It's a promise, he snarled, before finally letting Nora lead him away. I watched him go, and for the first time I felt nothing but pity for him. He was a small, hollow man, so consumed by his own greed and ego that he had tried to burn down everything around him. He hadn't just lost a court case, he had lost his family, his integrity, and himself. That night was the longest of my life. I sat with Lily, reading her stories, tucking her into bed, my mind a million miles away in that courtroom. I had done everything I could, I had fought with honor. But the fate of my future with my daughter was now in the hands of a judge. The next morning, I dressed in my uniform again. It felt different today, not like armor but like my own skin. It was a part of me, inseparable from the woman and the mother I had become. We all gathered in the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation. David sat stone-faced, Nora beside him looking grim. I sat with Sarah, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Judge Vance entered and took her seat. She didn't waste any time. She looked down at the documents before her, then looked out at us. I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented in this case, she began, her voice formal and clear. On the matter of the Lily Jackson Trust, the evidence of financial malfeasance on the part of Mr. Jackson is overwhelming and deeply disturbing. His actions represent a profound betrayal of his fiduciary duty and his parental responsibility. She paused, looking directly at David. On the matter of custody, this court's only concern is the best interest of the child. Mr. Jackson's legal team has attempted to argue that Colonel Jackson's military service renders her an unstable and unsuitable parent. They have painted a picture of a woman damaged by war, a mother whose dedication to her country comes at the expense of her child. She looked over at me, but the evidence presented tells a very different story. It tells the story of a woman of extraordinary courage, compassion, and integrity. A woman who has dedicated her life to saving others. The court finds the testimony of Mr. Ethan Hayes to be without merit, motivated by personal animus, and in direct contradiction to the credible and powerful testimony of General Marcus Thorne. A parent's love and fitness cannot be measured in the number of birthdays they attend, she continued, her voice ringing with conviction. It is measured in sacrifice, in resilience, in the values they instill, and in the example they set. This court believes that being raised by a mother of Colonel Jackson's caliber is not a detriment to a child. It is a privilege. Therefore, she declared, her voice firm, it is the decision of this court to award sole legal and physical custody of the minor child, Lily Jackson, to the respondent, Lieutenant Colonel Arya Jackson. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sole custody. I had one. It was over. Tears streamed down my face, silent tears of relief, of exhaustion, of overwhelming, heart-stopping gratitude. Sarah squeezed my hand, her own eyes shining. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, Mr. Jackson will be granted supervised visitation twice a month, pending the outcome of the district attorney's investigation into his financial crimes. He is ordered to make full restitution to the trust and to pay for all of Colonel Jackson's legal fees. That is all. She banged the gavel. The sound was final. It was the sound of my future, my daughter's future, being handed back to me. I saw David across the room. He looked broken, a man completely and utterly defeated. His promise from the day before was just the empty threat of a powerless man. He had nothing left. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright D.C. morning. The gray clouds had broken and the sun was shining. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I had faced the fire and I had walked out standing, not just for me, but for my daughter. And for every man and woman in uniform who had ever been told that their service somehow made them less of a parent, less of a person. Today, we had one. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. Life after the verdict was like the quiet aftermath of a storm. The floodwaters of legal battles receded, leaving behind a landscape that was altered, but peaceful. The first thing I did was take Lily to the beach. We spent a whole weekend in a small rented cottage, with no pagers, no cell service, just the sound of the waves and the feeling of sand between our toes. We built magnificent sandcastles, collected seashells, and stayed up late eating popcorn and watching old movies. "Mommy," Lily said, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, her head resting on my shoulder. "Are you happy now?" "I am so happy, Lilybug," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Because I have you." She was smiling again. The anxious, worried little girl from the past few months was gone, replaced by the bright, bubbly child I knew and loved. The stability she craved wasn't about a parent being home every single night. It was about the security of knowing she was loved unconditionally, that she was safe. The court case had threatened that security, but now it was restored, stronger than before. Back in D.C., life settled into a new normal. David was true to his word in one respect: he disappeared. Faced with a criminal investigation and the public humiliation of the verdict, he accepted a job offer from an international firm and moved to their London office. He paid the restitution and my legal fees in a lump sum, a final, impersonal transaction. He called Lily occasionally, his calls stilted and brief. I could see the sadness in her eyes after he hung up, a daughter's natural grief for a father who had chosen to walk away. But I also saw her resilience. She was a soldier's daughter, after all. At Walter Reed, a weight had been lifted. My team, who had been my staunchest allies, celebrated my victory as their own. Ben organized a small, impromptu party in the doctor's lounge with a terrible sheet cake and lukewarm coffee, and it was one of the best parties I'd ever been to. "To the Colonel," Ben said, raising his paper cup. "Who can stare down a 4-star general, a shark of a lawyer, and a ruptured Yorta, all without breaking a sweat?" Everyone cheered. Lena gave me a fierce hug. "You showed them, ma'am. You showed them all." A few weeks later, I received a formal engraved invitation in the mail. It was a request for a meeting with General Thorne at the Pentagon. I went in my dress uniform, my heart pounding with a nervous energy I hadn't felt since I was a young lieutenant. The Pentagon was a city unto itself, a labyrinth of power. His office was surprisingly understated, filled with books, maps, and photographs of his family. "Colonel Jackson," he said, rising from behind his desk to shake my hand. "Please sit. Coffee?" "Yes, sir, thank you." He poured 2 mugs himself, handing one to me. There were no aides, no ceremony. "I trust everything is settled on the home front?" he asked, his gaze direct. "It is, General, and I never had the chance to properly thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "Arya, you don't need to thank me. I did what was right. The Army takes care of its own. What your ex-husband tried to do, using your honorable service as a weapon against you, it was a disgrace. I couldn't let that stand." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. "That's not the only reason I asked you here today," he continued, leaning forward. "I've been following your career for a while, even before the trial. Your record is exceptional. Your work in trauma surgery is groundbreaking. But your leadership during those humanitarian missions, that's where you truly shine. You have a unique ability to create order out of chaos, to lead with both strength and compassion in the most extreme environments." I didn't know what to say. "Thank you, sir. I'm not just giving you a compliment, Colonel. I'm giving you a new mission, if you want it." He slid a thin file across the desk. The cover was stamped with a single seal I didn't recognize. "The Army is launching a new initiative. The Global Health Engagement Program. It's a joint service command, a rapid deployment medical unit designed to be the tip of the spear in international health crises. Natural disasters, pandemics, complex humanitarian emergencies. They won't just be treating patients, they'll be setting up entire medical infrastructures, training local doctors, working with NGOs and foreign governments." He paused, his eyes locking with mine. "They need a leader. Someone who is both a world-class surgeon and a seasoned combat officer. Someone who understands the complexities of operating in unstable regions. Someone who can command the respect of soldiers, doctors, and diplomats alike. The selection committee has reviewed the files of every qualified O5 in the medical corps. Your name is at the top of the list." I stared at the file, my mind reeling. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. A chance to build something from the ground up, to use my skills on a global scale to make a real, lasting difference. But a familiar dread crept in. "Sir," I said, my voice hesitant, "this sounds like a lot of travel, a lot of time away from home." He nodded, his expression understanding. "It will be demanding, there's no question. But the command is based here. In DC, you would be in charge of the entire program. You would decide who deploys when and for how long. You would travel, yes, but for shorter strategic missions, not long-term deployments. The days of being a surgeon in a tent for 3 months at a time would be over. You would be the one directing those surgeons." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Arya, what David said in that courtroom? It was a lie. But it was a powerful lie because it preyed on a fear that every service member who is also a parent feels. The fear that we can't do both, that we have to choose. I'm here to tell you that's not true. You don't have to choose, you just have to find the right way to serve. This program, this is a way for you to serve your country at the highest level while still being the mother you need to be, the mother Lily deserves." His words resonated deep within me. He wasn't just offering me a job, he was offering me a solution. A path forward that didn't require me to sacrifice one part of myself for another. A way to integrate my 2 great loves, my daughter and my duty. "This is an 06 billet, of course," he added, almost as an afterthought. "The promotion to full colonel would be effective immediately." I looked down at the silver oak leaves on my shoulders, the rank I had worked so hard for, and then I thought of the eagle of a full colonel. It was a leap I had hoped to make one day, but never this soon. I thought of Lily. I thought of our new life, the quiet stability we were building. Could I do this? Could I take on a global command and still be there for piano recitals and parent-teacher conferences? The old fears, the ones David had so expertly exploited, whispered in the back of my mind. But then I thought of the general's words. You just have to find the right way to serve. This was it. It was a chance to redefine what service looked like for me. It wasn't about being in the line of fire anymore. It was about leading, about building, about protecting people on a massive scale. I closed the file and pushed it back across the desk. I looked General Thorne in the eye, the soldier in me replaced by the leader he saw. "When do I start, sir?" A slow, proud smile spread across his face. "Welcome aboard, Colonel." Walking out of the Pentagon that day, the world felt different, wider, full of possibilities. The trial had forced me to defend who I was. This new command was a chance to define who I was going to be. That evening, I sat down with Lily and told her about my new job. I explained it in terms she could understand. "You know how I'm a doctor who helps soldiers?" I asked. She nodded. "Well, my new job is to be the boss of a whole team of doctors like the Avengers, and whenever there's a big problem somewhere in the world like an earthquake or a big storm, I get to send my team to go help everyone. And I get to be in charge from here in my office so I can be home to tuck you in at night." Her eyes grew wide. "So you're like Captain America, but a doctor." I laughed. "Something like that, sweetie. Something exactly like that." She threw her arms around my neck. "That's the coolest job ever, Mommy. You're a superhero." In that moment, holding my daughter in my arms, I knew I had made the right decision. I had faced the darkest parts of my past, the betrayal of my husband, and the potential loss of my child, and I had emerged not just intact, but stronger. I had found a new way to serve, a new way to lead, and a new way to be a mother. My two worlds weren't in conflict anymore. They had finally become one. The battle was over. The war was won. And for the first time, the future looked as clear and bright as the stars on a general's shoulders. Stepping into my new office on the top floor of the Defense Health Headquarters felt like stepping into a different world. The rank of full colonel sat on my shoulders, the silver eagle a heavy, tangible symbol of the journey I had taken. My office was spacious, with a large window overlooking the Potomac. But the centerpiece was the wall-to-wall digital map of the world, currently glowing with a calm, peaceful green. It was my job to keep it that way, and to command the response when it inevitably turned red. My first few weeks were a blur of briefings, personnel selections, and logistical planning. I built my command team from the best and brightest the military had to offer. I brought Ben Carter over from Walter Reed to be my chief of operations. His calm under pressure was exactly what I needed at my right hand. And for my lead rapid deployment surgical team, my first choice was Lena Petrova. I saw in her the same fire and skill that had once driven me, and I knew she was ready. "You're really giving me the keys to the kingdom, Colonel?" she asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and awe when I offered her the position. "I'm giving you the scalpel, Major," I corrected her, tapping her newly pinned gold oak leaves. She had been promoted on my recommendation. "I expect you to use it to save the world." The first test came sooner than any of us expected. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake devastated a remote, mountainous region in South America. Within minutes, the map in my office lit up, a deep crimson blooming over the Andes. The call came at 3 in the morning. I was at my command center within the hour, the organized chaos feeling both new and deeply familiar. "Ben, what's our satellite imagery look like?" I asked, my eyes scanning a dozen different data streams. "Infrastructure is gone, Colonel," he reported, his face illuminated by the glow of a screen. "Roads are impassable. The main regional hospital has collapsed. We're looking at tens of thousands of casualties with no local medical support." "Lena," I said into my headset, patching her in from the ready room where her team was already assembled. "Your team is wheels up in 90 minutes. Your primary drop zone will be this plateau here," I indicated on the map. "It's the only stable ground we can find large enough for a C-17 to land. From there, it's all helicopter transport into the affected villages. You will be the only surgical care in a 500-mile radius for at least the first 48 hours. The mission is to save who you can and stabilize the rest until larger international aid can arrive." "Understood, Colonel," her voice came back, crisp and confident. "We're ready." For the next 3 days, I lived in that command center. I slept on a cot in my office, my mind a constant whirlwind of logistics, supply chains, and medical reports. I directed air traffic, coordinated with the State Department and the host nation's government, and made life-or-death decisions about where to allocate our limited resources. It was the most challenging and exhilarating work I had ever done. I wasn't holding the scalpel anymore. I was directing the entire symphony of healing from 1,000 miles away. But this time, something was different. In the middle of the most critical phase of the operation, my preset alarm went off on my personal tablet. It was 4:30 p.m., Lily's parent-teacher conference. "Ben, you have the con for 20 minutes, I said, pulling off my headset. He nodded, not missing a beat. "Go be a mom, Colonel." I stepped into a small, soundproofed video conference room and dialed Ms. Albright. Her smiling face appeared on the screen. "Colonel Jackson, I know you're busy," she said. I had given the school a heads up about the emergency. "Never too busy for this, Ms. Albright," I said. "How is my lilybug doing?" "She's thriving, Arya," the teacher said warmly. "She's a leader in the classroom, bright, confident, and so compassionate, and she is so incredibly proud of you. She tells everyone that her mommy is the boss of the medical Avengers." We talked for 15 minutes about Lily's progress in math, her love for reading, her friendships. It was a pocket of perfect, beautiful normalcy in the midst of a global crisis. When the call was over, I sat for a moment in the quiet room, a profound sense of peace washing over me. This was it. This was the balance. I could command a life-saving mission in another hemisphere and still be present for a conversation about my daughter's spelling tests. I hadn't chosen one life over the other. I had built a life big enough for both. The mission was a resounding success. Lena's team performed over 200 life-saving surgeries in the first week alone. They established a functioning field hospital that became the backbone of the entire international relief effort. When Lena finally returned, she came to my office, looking exhausted but triumphant. "We did it, Colonel," she said, a proud smile on her face. "We made a difference." "You did more than that, Major," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "You gave people hope. There's no greater mission than that." My life found its rhythm. I was a commander, a strategist, a mentor, and I was a mother. I was there for every piano recital, every school play, every scraped knee. I would sit at the dining room table in the evenings, my laptop open to a logistics report from a team in Africa, while Lily sat opposite me, working on her own homework. We were a team. One evening, about a year after the trial, I found an old photo while cleaning out a desk drawer. It was of David and me on our wedding day. We were young, smiling, full of a hope I barely recognized. I felt a brief pang, not of loss, but of nostalgia for a person I used to be. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then I gently placed it in a box of things to be put away. It was part of my story, but it wasn't my whole story. My story was the one I was living now. It was in the silver eagle on my collar and in the crayon drawing from Lily taped to my office monitor. It was in the grateful eyes of a foreign diplomat and in the sleepy goodnight hug from my daughter. I was once told in a cold, sterile courtroom that my service made me unfit to be a mother. A man I once loved tried to use my scars as proof that I was broken, but he was wrong. Our scars are not signs of weakness. They are maps of our survival. They are proof that we have been tested, that we have endured, and that we have healed. My work didn't break me, it built me. The chaos of the battlefield taught me to cherish the peace of my home. The fragility of life taught me the fierce, unbreakable strength of a mother's love. My name is Colonel Arya Jackson. I am an officer in the United States Army, and I am the commander of a global medical force. But my most important title, the one that defines me above all others, is Mom. I didn't have to choose between my duty and my daughter. I learned to build a world where I could honor both. And in doing so, I found the truest kind of victory, not a victory on the battlefield, but a victory in the heart. A peace I had not only fought for, but had finally, truly, earned for myself. My story is a testament to the fact that a woman's strength isn't measured by the battles she's chosen, but by the world she chooses to build from the ashes. And I was just getting started building ours.